Hi everyone, welcome to the fourth episode of DevMadot, where we get to talk to expert DevRels, expert developer marketers, and learn from their experience. And today we are going to be discussing about developer experience, and our guest for today's episode is Sam Julien. Please introduce yourself, Sam.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Sophia, for having me. I'm Sam Julien. I am the director of developer relations for an AI company called Writer. And before that, I was director of dev advocacy for Auth0 by Okta. So, yeah, thrilled to be here. I'm in the Pacific Northwest of the US. And yeah, happy to chat about developer experience today.
Awesome. And I'm really excited to learn a thing or two. Okay, so how about you tell us a bit about your journey as a developer relations? How did you get started? How did you get to where you are right now?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a self-taught second career developer. I have been in tech now for about a decade. It was around 2013 that I started learning to code professionally. I got my first job in 2014 as a software developer. Before that, I worked in finance for about 5 years in financial services and sales and stuff like that. And I was actually I was working at a financial brokerage when I started learning to code. I had actually grown up wanting to be a programmer. I had done a little bit of HTML and CSS in middle school, but I was growing up in the 90s and there was no YouTube, there was no Code Academy, there was no free code camp. None of that existed yet. And so I basically tried to get books from the library and learn to code, and it was not very successful. So I kind of always assumed you needed a computer science degree to become a programmer, and I had never done that. And so I was working at a financial brokerage, and some of the developers there I got to be friends with, and it turned out, like several of those hadn't gotten computer science degrees, and one of the lead senior developers hadn't finished college, and so it was really encouraging. And so they started pairing with me and giving me resources, and I started learning to code and never looked back. I moved to Portland, Oregon, and became a junior full stack developer doing C# and JavaScript, and then eventually moved to a renewable energy nonprofit in Portland, doing C# and Angular. And then in the middle of that, I started doing content creation. Um, I was part of the Angular community, and in the Angular world in around 2016 or so, they made a big transition from Angular 1 to Angular 2. That was a really big breaking change. And so I made this really comprehensive video course about how to migrate from Angular 1 to Angular 2. It was like 200 videos, and super comprehensive. And that kind of launched my career basically publicly. And so I became a Google developer expert. I started speaking at conferences, and that's what led me to Auth0. They had an opening content engineer, basically. And so I joined Auth0 in 2018 on the content team. And that sort of started my DevRel journey, where I did content, I became a developer advocate, I then became the manager of the DevRel team, and then the director over the course of like 6 years, working pretty much every corner of DevRel, from when we were a startup to when we got acquired by Okta, and then as a publicly traded company with Okta. So I got a lot of experience at that. And then, like a lot of people, was part of a lot of layoffs that happened at the beginning of this year. But luckily, I was snatched up pretty quick by Writer, which I'm super excited about. I just started that this week, and it's been awesome so far. And I'm thrilled with what I'm going to be able to do there. So yeah, that's my story in a nutshell.
Wow, that was an amazing story from, being a GDG expert to having your first role and now at writer. So can you tell us a bit more about, your role as writer?
So I'm their first director of developer relations, and I sit under marketing, under the VP of growth, and so I'll be really building the developer motion from scratch at Right. One thing that I really love about Writer is so they're an enterprise generative full stack generative AI company. So they solve a bunch of workflow problems for AI for enterprise companies using AI, but they also have a lot of deep open source roots, and they still contribute to open source. There's a really famous AI company called Hugging Face that's like an open source platform, and they were a customer of Hugging Face before, and they grew and became this great company. And so we still host the Palmyra, several of the Palmyra models, and several of our data sets on Hugging Face. So I love that because I'll be able to do both. I'll be focused on reaching enterprise developers for the platform itself and supporting customers and helping them bring them into the platform. But then I'll also be able to help build our open source strategy and really flesh that out as we continue to give back to the open source AI community. So I'll be doing wearing a lot of hats, helping with developer experience and developer marketing, and getting out in the community and helping to build our developer community. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to be able to basically apply all this experience I got over the years to something brand new and shiny, and with a really cool, smart group of people. So yeah, I'm super excited.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited to see a lot of the things that you would be doing as writer. So
Yeah, thanks.
to get started on our topic of the day, yesterday lead developer had a space on developer experience, and it seems like a lot of people really don't know what developer experience is. Either they have an idea or they don't have like a well-grounded idea of that. So, what is developer experience?
My definition of developer experience is pretty simple. It's what is it like for developers to build using your platform, your product, your service? I mean, that's sort of what it comes down to, from never hearing about the product or service or platform. I'm just going to say product to be succinct, but um, basically from never hearing about it at all to then implementing it in production at scale. Well, that's what we call the developer journey, um, going from never hearing about something to fully implementing it. And there's some steps in between there of trying it out and learning more about it and exploring and building a proof of concept and that kind of thing. And that whole process, there is developer experience in that. And so what does that look like practically? Well, that's things like your docs, your SDKs, your APIs, if you have any CLI tool. But basically, you're looking for how much friction is there for a developer to go from learning about what your product is to actually using it in a real application. Um, and so the goal for companies is to reduce that friction as much as possible, to make it a smooth, nice experience, logical APIs and clear documentation. Um, and then, to really go above and beyond, you want to add some surprise and delight in there to really make it like a nice experience. Because ultimately, what you want is for developers to be like fans of your product, so that they will actually tell their coworkers, like, "Oh, you've got to use this thing," or they'll talk about it at meetups, or um, maybe even go so far as to join one of your community programs and help spread the word about the product. So that's how I define developer experience, and it really comes down to um, all the different surface areas that a developer is going to touch, and making sure that they're well made and easy to use, and maybe even a little bit fun to use.
Yeah, well, that was an amazing definition of developer experience. So now, why do you think that companies need developer experience in their campaign or in general?
It's kind of what I was mentioning about, the more you can reduce the friction for developers, the more they're going to become fans of the product, that they'll want to use it. If even though what's fascinating about developer marketing is that even though, unless you're doing a kind of a self-service credit card motion, some products do have developers actually driving revenue. But in a lot of companies where you're dealing with enterprise contracts and that kind of thing, developers aren't the ones signing the checks, but they are the ones who are making a lot of noise and influencing the decision makers that are buying the software. And so developer experience is really critical for that, because if you've got a director of engineering who comes down and says like, hey, we're going to start using X product, and the developers all groan and are like, oh man, like, don't make us use that. It's so terrible. The docs are a mess. The CLI is a disaster. I never want to use that. Please don't make us use that. Um, maybe the director says like, too bad, we're doing it anyway. But a lot of times they're like, oh, okay, never mind then. Let's find something better. Like, what else should we use? And if they do say, too bad, we're using it anyway, it doesn't help the company in the long run. Um, so what you want, we used to always say this at Auth0, of like, what we want is for there's to be pressure from both sides. We want the developers at the company to be saying like, you got to use this. Like, we're building authentication, you got to use Auth0. It's got the best developer experience. And then we also want the directors and VPs and CTOs saying like, oh, you've got to, we've heard so many great things about this product, we need to use it. So that's like what it really comes down to in the bottom line. But then there's also, that's sort of the company's benefit, but then there's also like the community goodwill benefit of good developer experience. I think we see this a lot, like with Astro in the JavaScript community right now. They put a real premium on their developer experience. Like, their CLI is really beautiful and works really well. And so Astro, I don't know their business plan details, but right now they're focused a lot on community growth. And building that community goodwill, so that whenever they do monetize something, which I don't know if that's going to be their database or what, but that's going to be a big thing for them. So developer experience contributes to a lot of things, both for community goodwill, for revenue. It's incredibly important. You definitely can't underestimate the importance of really good developer experience.
I mean, yeah, I agree with that because I have been seeing a lot of Astro community focused engagement. I am not a front end developer. I don't use JavaScript, but I
That's right.
know
Yeah.
Astro and I know what they do. And I think that they are really, really amazing at what they are currently doing. So
Yeah.
from your experience, how do you tell between a good developer experience and a poor developer experience? And what are some factors that contribute to that?
There's, yeah, it's fairly, some of it is just intuition of, is this easy to use? Like, when you're trying to get started and you want to, usually it's like you're trying to build a proof of concept to just see if you even want to try something out. That's kind of my go-to, and I think that's what a lot of developers do. Like, my process is I tend to take a look at the landing page, take a look at the documentation, and just see if it's like, is this even something I should try? And I do that pretty quickly. I don't spend a lot of time poring over everything before actually, like, I want to get my hands dirty as fast as possible to just see what the product is like. And so then I try to sign up for something, and I try to build a proof of concept, and maybe that's just getting an API key and testing something out in Visual Studio Code or something. And so that those first, couple of hours of using the product are where like a huge percentage of the developer experience happens, where you're seeing like, do the docs make sense? Are they logical? Are they accurate? Does the API make sense? Like, does it work? I was actually, during kind of all my interview process, I was interviewing with another AI startup, very, very small startup. And, I was prepping for the interview by testing out the product, and like the docs had a bunch of errors. The API Explorer, like I would put in my API key in the documentation, and it like I would try to test a call and it wouldn't work. The parameters like in the SDK didn't match the parameters that were on the docs. Like it was very frustrating, and like no shade to that company. They have an amazing product and everything, but like it was very frustrating, like just in the first 30 minutes. Like if I wasn't preparing for an interview, I would have just been like, forget it. I don't like I don't need to do this, like and so like I think that's a big part of it. The other part of developer experience that comes later is like the ability to get help. I didn't mention this earlier in the question, but that's another really important um, element of developer experience is like, where can I get answers to my questions? And that could look like a community forum. That could even look like a frequently asked questions. It could look like a Discord server. It could look like um, a support ticket. But importantly, developers, a lot of times, unless they're on an enterprise plan, they don't really want to talk to a person unless they're on an enterprise plan and they they're doing something for work. They want to get as much help as they can asynchronously, without putting a credit card in, and uh, without being funneled into a sales process. That's like usually not what they want. It changes when they're building an enterprise tool, and they're on a big enterprise plan. They expect to have customer service and that kind of thing. But that's another big part of it. And so yeah, that's another way of telling the difference between good and bad developer experience. How easy is it to use? How it's you can measure it by the level of frustration that you feel when you use the product. The more frustrated you are, the worse the developer experience is.
I mean, yeah, you are so right. If I ever come across a product or a platform that I cannot get the hang of it in the first 20 to 30 minutes, and I reach out and I don't get help within an hour, I'm sorry. I don't think I can use that.
Right.
And yeah. And at the place I did my DevRel internship at Pieces, they had a way that you as the user can submit your tickets. So if you are facing an issue using the products, or you want to consume one of your open source SDK, you can just go to GitHub and submit um, an issue. And for developers that use GitHub and know GitHub, I think that that is an amazing way, and that's really improved the developer experience using that platform.
Yeah, no, that's a great example.
So everyone has been talking about AI, like, I mean, developer or non-developer. I'm very sure that you've heard of AI. So do you think that AI can help improve developer experience of companies' product and tools?
Yeah, it's really interesting because you know AI will do whatever you train it to do. And so if you build in principles of good developer experience, you can definitely do that. Like I've been noticing that. I've been playing around with Vercel's v0.dev, which is like a way to generate UIs. And it's interesting how much of that they have sort of built in, like some of the best practices and some accessibility things and that kind of thing. Um, so it'll be interesting to see how that takes place. Like if you ask an AI to generate like CLI code for you, how much is it really going to know about, you know, is it going to go from the logical computer ideal of how a CLI would work, or is it going to look at it from a developer experience standpoint? And that's largely going to depend on how you prompt it, how you train it, that kind of thing. And so I think AI is a great tool for doing this kind of thing, but there will be, I think, human intervention needed to give it some parameters and some guardrails around like how it's used, you know.
I mean, I 100% agree. I mean, humans help AI, or rather, without a human figure, the AI will not run the way that we want it to run. So without that human engineer passing the right prompts, telling it to do the right thing, or sharing the right data, the AI will not really do what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's a super powerful tool, but it's still a tool that is going to need guidance and oversight.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Okay. So, from your experience, what are some common mistakes that you see companies, especially startups, um, do when they are trying to improve the developer experience?
I think one of the things that um, companies tend to do is they overcomplicate things and overlook the basics. So they might want to try to come up with some new tool or microsite or uh, Visual Studio plugin or something like that, but they've got their docs are broken or there's typos in them and they're hard to read or um, the API has some like weird dead endpoints that they haven't cleaned up, like things like that where um, just like 80% of it is just in like, is everything accurate, up to date, and easy to read? Like once that stuff's done, then you can go the extra mile of like, can I create this new tool or this new plugin or things like that? But all of that extra stuff doesn't really matter if the basics are not right. And so I see that most common of like they're they want to chase the what's going to make us like go viral and like get us really popular and get people talking about us on social media and that kind of stuff. And not that there's anything wrong with that, like that's a good thing to do, but you have to always remember that like any marketing effort like that, like the end goal is to bring more developers to the platform to use the platform. So if you do something that goes viral and bring people to the platform and then the developer experience, like the basic developer experience is terrible, it's going to totally backfire because people are going to come and they're going to be like, oh well, I heard about this on X, and but like there's all these typos in the docs and they haven't been updated in 3 years, and like why would I even want to use this? Like yeah, they have this cool new plugin, but like it's useless, you know. And so that I think is the biggest mistake, is not not just like making sure the basic stuff is done, you know, before you branch out too much.
I mean, I agree with you. If if a doc of an API, if an API docs is not updated or have not been updated for like the past 6, 7 months, I think that that really affects the developer experience because we we are in a field that is evolving every day. So new tools, new knowledge, new technology are coming out every day. And when the developer resources to help the users, to help the developers are not updated, it's just very poor. And from a user standpoint, it's going to make me not rely or not trust that product.
That's a great point. Something we haven't really touched on is you know the end goal of developer experience is building trust with the developer. Um, that's a great point, because what you're looking for is to make sure that you're building that relationship with the developer so that inevitably when there's changes to the product or changes to the API or changes to the pricing structure, things like that. I mean, those things are always going to happen in the world of software. And so you want to have that relationship with the developer so that they know like, well, I trust that this company has the developer's best interest in mind. I mean, even though they're still a company and they're going to want to make money, but like they have the developer in mind as one of their primary customers and primary personas. And I know based on this prior experience that I can ride things out with them because they're going to have my back at the end. So great point.
Yeah, true. Okay. So, how do you think a DevRel team can ensure consistency across different parts of the developer journey from onboarding to ongoing support in terms of improving or ensuring that the developer experience is amazing?
DevRel has a cool advantage in that they're really straddling the product and the marketing sides of things, and so they really have this opportunity to be the human API between the developer community, the product marketing people, the engineers building the product, and really try to bring a cohesive point of view of, you know, this is how our users are experiencing the product, and this is the feedback that we're getting, and balancing that out across the different stakeholders. Um, and so being that representative community voice is great because it brings a lot of empathy to the process of, like, they can come and say, well, I was talking to these developers at this company, which is one of our customers, and they were saying, here's some quotes from the interview that I had with them, or I ran into this group at a conference and they were asking me about, they were telling me how frustrating it is that this and this and this, right? Um, so that's a huge part of it. Another kind of more practical part that DevRel can help with, because they have that vantage point, is making sure that the style and tone and branding is consistent across the different parts of the developer experience. Because one thing that usually happens is that different groups will own different parts of the developer experience. Like marketing might own some of the web properties, product might own the API and stuff. There might be like a small engineering team that's building an SDK, and hopefully they're all talking to each other. But the bigger the company gets, the harder that becomes. And so DevRel's job is really to make sure that all of those people are on the same page and kind of bring that perspective, because hopefully they'll be in a lot of those meetings and they can connect those dots for people across. And that's really important because you really don't want, uh, you don't want the different parts of the developer experience to be clearly written by different teams. You want them to have a consistent tone of voice and consistent style, um, to make it a really cohesive journey for the developer across using the product.
I mean, I 100% agree to that. So we have a question from the audience. Kando asks, what incentive options can be used to get developers to test products and give honest feedback on developer products?
Yeah, it's a good question. The answer, I think, depends on how invested they are in the product in the first place. Like, are they already users of the product at all? Are they paying customers? Or are they just sort of like a random dev on the street that you're hoping to try the product? Because if you figure out where the group is on that spectrum, that'll help you with the figuring out the incentives. So, for example, if we look at the two extremes of the spectrum, you have like pulling a random developer off the street and asking them to try the product. Like, that incentive is going to need to be fairly transactional, like a gift card, or something that's going to, like, you're basically going to essentially have to pay them for their time if even if you can't actually pay them with money. It depends on kind of how your company works. But that's going to have to be much more transactional because they have, like we said, they have zero trust. They don't know who you are. They don't really care. Like, um, you could, I mean, that you could possibly do things with swag if you have a particularly popular company, that could work. If you're like a cool company, you could use swag for that. So that's sort of that one extreme. Then on the other extreme, if you've got customers who are heavily invested in your company and your product, and you need them to test a new feature or a new um, you know, uh, bug or something like that, then you can incentivize that usually with things like access. You could do an AMA with an engineering group, or um, help them contribute in some way back to the company, because usually that, like, you're looking for ways to like make their jobs easier, or make their, like, help them in their uh, either journey of using the product or in their career. So like when I was running the Auth Zero Ambassadors program, we had a lot of success with um, feedback sessions and beta tests and things like that, because these were like power users of the product. And so they wanted to talk to the engineering teams or the security teams. They wanted to like test features before they came out. They were invested. But on the flip side, if you're at an event or something, particularly if you're new, you're going to need some other like more transactional way to incentivize. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that was helpful, because I'm just going to speak from the user point of view again. If I get to know that I would be getting swag to test a product, or getting something back to test the product, I would definitely hop on that. So yes, you're right. Okay, I have another question here. So, how do you think companies can balance the needs of internal stakeholders with their users when it comes to developer experience?
This one is always tricky, because this is the constant tension between the different groups in a company, of like product and marketing and that kind of thing, where um, they're all going to have their own highest priorities. And so I think there's a few different ways that you can tackle this. One is being really clear from the top down what the highest priorities are for the company. So that if there's disagreements, you can point back to, we've got this objective for the year of, growth, for example, and does this decision contribute to that or not? And then that cascades down to where the different departments have that same, they'll have their top objectives for the half or the year or something like that. Um, I also think having good decision making practices really helps with that. Like being really clear about who is making the final decision on something versus who is just contributing, who's a blocking approver. Um, because I think that's one of the key downfalls, is when there's unclear expectations about who is actually owning a decision. And so if both a VP of product and a VP of marketing think that they're owning a decision, and the product person wants to use um, the customer's feedback, and the marketing person wants to use revenue data or something, like that's going to cause a conflict. So really getting everyone on the same page on what are the highest priorities and whose role is it to make those decisions. I think that's a big part of it. Um, a lot of companies have the customer voice as one of their highest, priorities, of like, how does this, I mean, most company, I think most should at least have that as a high priority, of like, what are our customers telling us? Like, because if you're not listening to your customer, then like, why are you even doing it? Um, but the problem is, you have to balance out like, what's the critical mass of customers who are giving this feedback versus the time and resources it's going to take to build this feature to fix this issue or something. So um, it is tricky. I think you have to. There's a lot of gray area there, and you have to really align on priorities and roles and responsibilities and stuff to work your way through that.
Yeah, wow, that was really insightful. So I think I would have to dial us back a bit when we talked about AI in developer experience. Do you think that AI can have a negative impact in developer experience or to the DevRel team in general?
I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, because on the one hand, I definitely think, AI, we're already seeing it is raising a lot of standards across the board because of how efficient it makes things. Um, we're seeing more and more companies start doing more with fewer people, because a lot of the more mundane or repetitive tasks can just be done in seconds. I mean, that's sort of like one of the things I love about Ryder and why I wanted to join, is like that's like their whole thing is taking these workflows and making them, saving customers days or weeks at a time, in those kinds of workflows, and that's amazing. But it also means that you're raising standards, because the even just for me, it's going to be so interesting. Like, I haven't been in a kind of content creation role in a while now, and now I'm kind of back to doing that. And when I was on the content team at Auth0 6 years ago, you know the time it would take me to write, edit, and publish an article was probably like a couple of weeks. And now with all the generative AI tools, it's going to be drastically shorter than that. And so I'm going to have to like move a whole lot faster, while also maintaining accuracy and incorporating a lot of things. So that's going to be really interesting. I think the con when it comes to DevRel and developer experience is sort of what we were talking about earlier with, um, I think there's always a risk for groupthink when AI is involved, of like, if everybody is using these LLMs to start generating content and, um, you know generating code and stuff like that, it's all going to align with however that LLM has been trained, or whatever guardrails have been put on it, whatever prompt has been used. So I'm a little worried that we'll start to see some, um, kind of things becoming more homogenous and more like kind of, um, less less creative. And I think some of the value of DevRel is like when things are a little rough around the edges and a little like creative and playful and fun, because it's like something that, it's a demo that somebody put together, and a piece of content that they put together. So there's going to be a higher level of like polish on things, and so I just hope that that doesn't end up, um, I'm hoping what will happen is that will be like a transitional phase to then we'll get to sort of a higher level of creativity and that kind of thing. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, same. I can't wait to see how AI really help, especially DevRel, and how
Hmm.
their day to day would start playing out.
It's gonna be interesting.
Yeah. So, from your experience, what are some non-traditional approaches to developer experience that goes beyond, the traditional training or documentation or community engagement sort of thing?
Yeah, there's several. I mentioned Astro earlier, and I used their CLI as an example, and that's an interesting one because CLIs are such an old, like, they've been around for forever, since the beginning of computing. um, and but there's still such a great developer experience if they're done correctly, like if they have a lot of feedback, and especially now you can make them colorful and have animations and things like that. And so CLIs are a really fun, element of developer experience, I think. There's also, there's always that sort of being able to provide tools of different kinds. So that could be something like a web property. Like at Auth0, we had jwt.io, which is, massively, massively popular. And it's just a simple tool where you paste in a JWT and it decodes it for you. But that was used a lot. Still is used constantly. And that could also look like I had mentioned, like Visual Studio Code plugins, or Chrome extensions, things like that. Anything that's sort of a value add tool, particularly if it's like, um, free, and maybe it's like only tangentially related to the product. That can be a nice way of like bringing, uh, some additional goodwill and developer experience. I think the best way to identify that is to um, find a point of friction that isn't directly related to the product. Like that's what it was with JWT.io. We found that like people needed a quick way of decoding JSON web tokens, and so one of the engineers put it together like 9 years ago or something. And so, and then the last one is open source, and that can also be a really good way. It's sort of tangentially related to the extra tools, but you can also create open source repositories, or like I had mentioned, Hugging Face and all of that earlier, where you're providing ways of developers to dig into kind of the space that you're in, the industry that your product is in, for free, and support them, give them tools that they can use. Whether that's that might be like adapters for different technologies that your product uses, or it might be kind of related libraries to something that you're doing. But open source is another really good way of doing that too.
Yeah. So speaking on talking about open source, so what do you think are some ways that open source projects can prioritize developer experience without um, um, prioritize developer experience while keeping sight of their missions and values?
I think it goes back to just really focusing on the basics, making sure that the way things are designed is logical and easy to use, whether it's the API or the SDK that you're building. Making sure the docs are well made. A lot of developer experience for open source is just predictable maintenance and releases, which is like easier said than done. I think if open source maintainers can nail the API and SDK design, the documentation, and the maintenance and release schedule, like they're ahead of like 80% of most open source projects. So like, I think that's a really good way to do it. It's not it's not flashy or, bringing a lot of attention, but I think like we've said, if you put the flashy stuff ahead of the basics, then it ends up backfiring in the end, and so you can generate a lot of buzz for an open source project by doing, creative stuff. But then if the, dependencies get stale and, it's breaking everything in the next release and that kind of thing, like people are just going to abandon it anyway. And so, and open source is it's a big commitment. I've had a lot of friends get burned out doing open source because it's so much work to do for free, and so just keeping those basics in mind, I think, is a really good way to try to keep that balance.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And I mean, you really gave amazing insights on how open source projects can improve developer experience. So, from your experience, or can you share your experience in developer experience? Like, how have you been able to improve? How have you did you do something that's made the developer experience for a product to fail or succeed?
Yeah, I mean, being a full stack developer, I was building UIs in addition to APIs, and most of my professional developer experience was in the enterprise world, and so I was building for internal users, like call center software, and like all those things that are basically like glorified spreadsheets that are internal business systems and that kind of thing. But so I think that gave me a really kind of critical eye on how users were using, like interacting with the interface and that kind of thing. And then simultaneously, I was because I was self-taught, you know, I think I was hypersensitive to the developer experience of the tools I was using because I was new and I didn't have a computer science background and that kind of thing. And so that I was relying on things like the docs and the materials and the CLI and that kind of thing. And so I think all of that experience gave me a lot of empathy for the products that I work on now as in developer relations. And so like at Auth0, I was heavily involved in a lot of different developer experience things. I did projects with the SDK teams. I, you know, I oversaw a lot of the, towards the end in the last couple of years, I oversaw a lot of the micro sites that we had and the developer center and things like that, where we were constantly getting feedback on like how developers were getting onboarded onto the platform and how we could make that smoother and that kind of thing. I had also been involved in like some of the updated onboarding in the dashboard when you first create a new Auth0 account, and there was a video and that kind of thing. I was involved in a lot of that stuff. So so I've sort of looked at it from many angles of all the different ways that a developer is getting to use a product, and Auth0 has a large surface area, and so it was a really good way for me to really dig into that. It also had the added complexity of being, an identity and security product, which is already a very complicated topic, and figuring out how to like abstract some of that away for the developer, while also giving them the tools that they need to actually, do their job and that kind of thing was a really interesting challenge. So, yeah, that's sort of where I have come from DX.
I mean, thank you for sharing your experience. It's really been amazing to learn how you've come from a JDG expert to a developer advocate to director of DevRel. And your insight on developer experience has been amazing, and I've learned quite a lot. So
Thanks.
before yeah, before this live stream, I knew developer experience as a way as the experience of developers when using a tool. But right now, I've been able to know more than that. And from a developer standpoint, I also know how to improve developer experience. And as a from a DevOps standpoint, I've also been able to learn a thing or two. So while we come towards the end of the stream, what should we expect from you for the next couple of months? Is there anything you're cooking, a book, course?
Yeah. So I'm working on a project called Growing in DevRel. I wrote a book in 2021 called Getting Started in DevRel. And ever since then, I've wanted to kind of come out with the next phase of that, because there's a lot of content on getting into developer relations, but not a whole lot on getting better at it, and like the developer relations career, and how to grow as a developer advocate, from whether you're trying to be a higher level individual contributor or get into the manager and director path. So I'm working through that, and I actually keep going back and forth on what format I'm going to make it. And so I'm trying really hard to build this in public, particularly now that I'm going to be building a developer motion from scratch. I'm trying to also kind of build that in public. And so I'm doing this experiment of having a small community where I'm going to kind of post updates on the course that I'm building, and just sort of reflections as I'm building what I'm doing at Writer and that kind of thing. So if you want to follow along with that, you can sign up at growingindevrel.com. That's probably a good way to get started on that. And because I really want to get feedback, I don't want to build something that's I want to build what people will find useful. And so I'm partially curious whether that looks more like a cohort course or something like that, or maybe it's a community And so I'm not exactly sure yet what I want that to be. And the reason I say that is that I've had at least 4 people ask me when the book is coming out. And so that tells me, that's like a signal to me that maybe people would rather have a book or that I'm not doing a good enough job saying that it's a course. So I want to be flexible. I want to listen to my audience and do what's most effective for them. So, um, but I do want to find a way to share kind of what I've learned and experienced over the last several years. So, so that's what's going on there. Yeah, I saw you put up my X handle. That's where I share a lot of
Yeah.
things around uh, what I'm doing and what I'm thinking and that kind of thing. I'm also on LinkedIn, and then I have a newsletter called Developer Micro Skills that I do periodically. If you sign up, there's sort of a long evergreen sequence that you can get an introduction to a lot of my writing, mostly on like personal productivity and things like that. That's another thing I'm really interested in. Whole different topic of uh, being more effective and doing so in a sustainable way that doesn't lead to burnout, because I've done the burnout thing before. So so check that out. um, yeah, I think those are the main sources for people to get in touch with me and follow along with what I'm up to.
Awesome. That's awesome. So before we go, you made mention of developer motion. So
Oh
I
yeah.
think, yeah, can you like give us more? Like, what is developer motion? Because this is the first time I'm hearing that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's great feedback. I sometimes take that for granted. So I use the phrase developer motion to encompass um, kind of the whole package when it comes to developers and a software company. So that is like developer marketing, like how are we going to reach developers, developer relations, like how are we going to stay engaged with developers and keep them in our community and get their feedback, and then developer experience of you know what's the developer journey like, how do developers go from discovering who we are to um, becoming fans of the product and using it in production and that kind of thing. So I've been using that as a shorthand to just encompass all of the developer things that a software company needs to think about, because they're all related. It's such an interesting, complex topic, because you can't really have one without the other. If you have poor developer experience, then your developer marketing is pointless. But if you don't have a good developer experience, like your developer relations efforts are going to be pointless. But you need developer relations in order to build a good developer experience. They're all interrelated. You got to use the feedback you get from DevRel for your developer marketing efforts. Like it's all a cycle that has to work together in tandem. And so that's the shorthand I've been using to encompass like all of those legs of the stool.
Wow, that's awesome. So I have learned another Devrel lingo, developer notion. Sorry, motion. Thank you for
Yes.
that.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So
Great.
before we end, do you have any last word for anyone out there that is watching or that would watch later, that is trying to get started in Devrel or advance in Devrel?
I think just trying to be kind of a encouraging to people of, you know, keep going, and you can totally do it. Like whatever you're working on. I remember I was doing I was working as a mentor for a code school in Portland, like in, I don't know, 2015 or 2016 or something. And I was still like fairly new in my career, and I was doing these like mentor sessions with junior developers, but I was still essentially a junior developer myself, so I had a lot of imposter syndrome. But I would do these calls, and the interesting thing that I noticed was that, like, most of the time, what the student on the other side really needed was just somebody to be like, yeah, this thing that you're working on is difficult, but you can definitely do it. I believe in you, and like we'll work through it together. Like the technical answer like really actually wasn't that important, and most of the time they would figure it out. We would do it on the call and they would figure out the answer. But just having somebody on the other side to be like, boy, yeah, that is confusing, like, but I know you can do this, like, you're really smart, you can totally do this, like, and so I just try to be that person as much as I can at this point in my career. And so if anybody ever needs that kind of boost, just like reach out to me on X and or LinkedIn, and I will tell you that you can do it. But yeah, that's really all I want to say.
Yeah. I mean, having someone to share you, it's really amazing. I mean, I've been able to come this far. I mean, even if I'm still, very early in my DevRel career, but I have been able to come far with having some friends, some um, people share me in my small corner, and thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for that final word. And a
yeah,
last word from me is DevRel is a space that you can easily burn out. Like, I mean, most DevRels in startup, you have to wear so many hats. So please try to, work within your limits. Say no to some projects and take breaks when you can, because I mean, taking break can really help recharge your brain, can really help recharge your mind and soul as well. So those are the last words
yes,
from me. So
yes, totally
Sam, thank
agree.
you very much. Yeah, Sam, thank you very much for coming on this podcast. Hopefully we get to have a second collaboration. And I'm really excited, and congrats once again on your role as writer.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was great to talk with you. And yeah, thanks to everybody who was listening.
All right, then, guys. Our next episode is with Jason Torres. That should be on the 3rd of May, where we will be talking about building an online presence. So please do well to subscribe to the channel so that you'll be notified of our next episode. Thank you and see you in 2 weeks' time. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye. Thank you.